That is what we came for.
So far on our CarpFix journey, you've seen us travel to Germany.
Boom! One for the road. It was a perfect end to a really, really good session.
And with travel restrictions hampering our future plans for filming, we've had no other option than to remain in the UK for the foreseeable future.
Gosh, perfect end to this morning's result.
Over the winter period, myself and Scott have travelled to some amazing lakes and had some wonderful results.
Gosh, that's got to be a 30.
As we've grown over the last 6 months, we've asked our members what they'd like to see from the CarpFix platform in the future.
I'm shaking, my mouth's dry, it's coming in. Look it up now, Tom.
Bringing on board the likes of Tom Maker has brought me more time to focus on the content you and I really want us to deliver.
This one on Banner Farms 18.
The two-tone mirror, £39, 11 ounces, and I've only been here about an hour and a half.
The Wasing Estate is nestled among the Kennet Valley, and the lakes are as picturesque as you could ever imagine. From the lows to the highs, follow us as I take on the challenge in attempting to deliver a UK 50 live for the CarpFix camera and start a new campaign in search of some of the best carp in the UK. There are 2 lakes on the Wasing Estate, Cranwell's, which was once home to the current British record carp, and the Oxlease Lake, which is a 10-acre water I fished once back in the autumn of 2020 for Corder's big carp buzz.
They told me that it was going to be really difficult. You know, they said 75 to 80 fish, 10 acres, very deep. That's sort of what I was told before I got here. On arrival, there were very few people around, so I think there was 1 or 2 people fishing on the first day that I came, and we immediately saw a lot of fish topping. That was like the first takeaway, you know, getting to a lake that's supposedly got 75 to 80 fish in it, 10 acres, seeing fish top. You know, often on deep lakes, fish do jump, but it's always nice to see them firsthand. You know, I was expecting that they might like to jump, but to see them was a real confidence booster. Like, it gives you, if you can locate carp, you know, you can usually catch them. You know, that's if I haven't seen anything, I'm not confident, and when I do see them, I do feel confident. So having seen those fish topping on the first day, I was very, very confident. What actually happened was we fished for the fish where we saw them jumping on the first day, and then the wind changed and the fish vanished. And I just had this feeling in my sort of just instinct, no factual evidence, but the fact that they've been jumping out in front of me on arrival, and then 24 hours later with a slight breeze blowing the opposite way and the instant drop off in activity, it just made me feel that the fish had done the off. So I anticipated that they would go to the far end of the lake, went into a swim that's known as the bowl, and I made an awful lot of disturbance, casting around loads and loads of times. Found one nice-ish spot that I was quite happy with. By the time we finished and you put all that effort in, you feel like you've destroyed any chance of a take. Having found the spot, I baited it, and then I thought probably best to go, because I hadn't seen any fish at that point, probably best to fish in the middle of the lake, anticipating that the fish had come from the first end and maybe I'd have a chance to pick off some fish on the way through. So I fished in the middle of the lake on the second night, didn't see any fish during the evening. In the morning, I've heard one jump in the bowl, which is the swim that I'd plumbed to death. So maybe when I was making all of that casting in the bowl, they weren't actually there, and I could have cast out and they'd have turned up on me. But, you know, hindsight is a wonderful thing in carp fishing. And although it was, maybe you could consider it a mistake, as in I'd wasted a dawn fishing in a swim where the fish weren't, I'd actually baited up in the bowl. When I found that spot, I baited it up. I then pulled out of there. The fish have had a chance to come into the bowl, find the bait. I've heard one show, and I've moved round into the bowl, cast out onto this pre-marked spot that I pre-baited, and caught one before I've even got the second rod out. It's a take. Don't do it. Go on, go in there. Go on. Those big you think, yes, yes. It was a 36 pounder, but to cut a long story short, the fish came into that bowl in numbers. They were showing relentlessly, you know, and at that time I could have easily believed there was 75 to 80 carp in the lake. You know, they told me that it was probably 75 to 80. The amount of fish topping in that bay would probably indicate that was correct. And in the 2 nights that I fished in the bowl, I caught 6 fish. Now, the locals, the regulars, friends and people that I know that have fished here, they were like, that is a really, really, really big result, you know. But when you're on your first session, you're thinking, well, maybe there is 75 to 80 fish, but the more that, obviously I'm there in the moment catching those carp, people are like, nah, there's only 35 to 40 carp in here. And a 6 fish catch is like pretty much unheard of, you know. It's not saying it's never been done before, but because it probably has, because I don't know the history of it, but certainly on a 10-acre lake that's only got 35 to 40 fish in it, to catch 6 on your first session was doing really well. So when arriving for my first session post the big carp buzz, you know, the whole winter had gone by, I've been filming for Corda sort of back end of April, but coming into May, you know, I know it's a great time, the weather had been cold. I started to hear about other people fishing here. I'd heard Oz Holness had a ticket, heard Tom Stokes had a ticket, and one of the things that I sort of took from my first session that really sort of stood out and gave me confidence was not only that I caught 6 fish, that there was very little angling pressure on this lake. Most of the syndicate is a 60-man syndicate, and people sort of, that is spread across the 2 lakes. And it seemed like most people were focusing on Cranwell's next door because it's got more fish. And having caught 6 and not seen many anglers and Oxleas, you know, the most difficult thing about carp fishing for me is other people being in the swim where I need to be. That is the single biggest problem that I face generally. You know, technically I feel confident, location-wise I feel confident, and when I'm hearing like anglers like Tom Stokes and Oz Holness have got tickets and they're going to be fishing there as well, you know, I know the competition to be in the right swims is going to be there. You know, that biggest fear that I had has now gone up a level by the level of competition of the anglers that you're surrounded by. People with time, people with good experience. So coming from my first session, knowing that guys like Tom and Oz were ahead of me, you know, they were ahead of me in terms of time on the water in the lead up to my arrival. So that was a concern for me, you know, knowing that there's good anglers that have had time on the water, chance to see where the fish are getting, what they're doing, and I felt like I was at a slight disadvantage, you know, having started a little bit late. I'd been busy working for Corda, and I just felt, yeah, I had a little bit of a disadvantage. But coming through the gate for your first session,
Colin McRae, easy left.
You know, obviously the bowl was where I caught my 6 fish on my first session, and my plan was, you know, I drove around the lake sort of on the cusp of dawn, and I sort of put it. There's a middle swim called Matties. There's 3 swims on one side of it. You've got the bowl, Matties, and then you've got Powers. And Matties was free, and I put my car there, and I just wanted to wait for the guy to wake up in the bowl to find out when he was leaving. Anyway, he stayed in his bivvy most of the morning, and I didn't want to go and wake him up. And then after speaking to the guy that was in the power swim on the opposite side of where I was, it turned out that he had already reserved the swim to go in the bowl behind the guy, you know. So having made the effort to get here at dawn, spent sort of a couple of hours loitering around waiting to ask that question, you know, what were the chances of getting in that swim, I found out I'd been wasting my time. You know, that swim had already been taken. That first session I learned in that first encounter with Gary, who was fishing power swim, I learned obviously that he was going into the bowl swim, but I also learned that a guy called Simon Davey was fishing here as well, and he's a guy that I know from my time at Yateley again and from Coningbrook all those years ago. A very good angler, Simon. And I think that the sort of chat was that he'd had a few. I'm going to say he might have had 2 and lost 2, or he might have had 3 and lost 2, or something like that. none of the really big ones, but he'd been here. He's a trawler man, does like netting at sea, and he works month on, month off, and he'd been here during April, and he'd, like I say, I think he caught 3 and lost 2. And the fish had come from 2 swims, one being the bowl, the one that I'd wanted before I arrived, and another swim that they call the narrow. And the narrow is the next swim, sort of the closest to the bowl, that fishes on the entrance into that area. It's thin, a thin channel with a reed line along the back. And Gary said that he'd either had 1 and lost 1 there, I think, and the other 3 takes might have been out of the bowl. But so immediately I'm thinking, yep, my idea to fish in the bowl is pretty good, but he's going in there. So for my first session, I fished in the reedy narrow swim, as they call it. And because on my first trip I'd caught in a depth of about 12 to 13 feet, the weather was like a big southwesterly, was blowing down the lake hard. And it didn't feel like the right weather to be fishing really shallow, if I'm honest. And because of that, and because of the previous action that I'd had, I decided to fish down. I basically fished 2 rods to the reed bed in sort of 10, 11 foot on a really steep marginal shelf. And I left them in place for 2 nights. Scotty sat with me, got some GVs of the session stuff, but I never recast during that session. I never saw any fish, and I never felt like I was going to catch one, if I'm honest. You know, I was there sucking up the information. You know, I sucked up what Simon had happened previously to me arriving, and it sort of confirmed the areas where I wanted to be looking. But at that point, on that first session, other than taking the information, I fished badly, as in I wasn't doing it correctly. Because when I pulled out of that swim, Tom Stokes went directly in behind me and caught 2. One of each morning of the 2 nights that he was in the swim, he went in behind me and caught 2 straight off the bat.